I remember the first time my daughter came running into the kitchen that night. I had just finished washing the dishes, my hands still damp, and the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She looked different. Something in her eyes made me freeze in place. She wasn't crying yet, but the way she was staring at the fridge, the way her lips trembled, it was clear she was on the edge of breaking. "Mom," she whispered, almost as if she couldn't find the words. My heart started racing, and I tried to calm myself with a simple thought. Maybe it was just food gone bad. Maybe it was nothing. But the look on her face said otherwise. She was pale, her small hands gripping the edge of the counter as if she needed something solid to hold on to. I followed her gaze, stepping closer, expecting to see a spill, a forgotten carton of milk, something that would explain her sudden terror. And then I realized, she wasn't looking at the fridge itself. She was looking at what was inside. I had lived in that house for 25 years, and in all that time, I had never seen my daughter so utterly shocked. She fell to her knees right there on the tile floor, her fingers brushing the open refrigerator door as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing completely. "Mom," she said again, this time with a trembling voice that broke my heart. And she finally held up what she had found. It was a small glass container, plain and unassuming. The kind of thing you might not even notice if it were tucked behind a bottle of juice or a stack of leftovers. But my daughter was staring at it like it was the most important thing in the world. And in that moment, I realized that it was. I took a step closer, my own pulse hammering in my ears, and tried to speak. "Sweetheart, what is it?" She didn't answer. She just shook her head, tears forming in her eyes, and I could see her struggling to even breathe. I reached out, gently taking the container from her hands, and my stomach dropped the moment I looked inside. I had made that container weeks ago, on a quiet afternoon when no one was home. I had wrapped it carefully, labeled it with a small, neat sticker, and placed it in the fridge, thinking it was something that would never be discovered until I was ready. But now it was here, in my daughter's hands, and the reaction it provoked. It was beyond anything I could have imagined. It wasn't just food. It wasn't leftovers or an old cake. It wasn't something that could simply be thrown away or cleaned up. What she had found was a piece of my past, a secret I had hoped would stay buried forever. And in that moment, looking at her kneeling there, I realized that my carefully constructed life, my quiet house, my normal routine, had been shattered in a single instant. "Mom, why?" she finally whispered, her voice cracking. She couldn't finish the sentence. I understood why. The contents of that container told a story that no child should ever stumble upon. A story about choices I had made, about mistakes I had tried to hide, about parts of my life I had locked away and hoped would never resurface. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice, to make it calm, though inside I was spinning with panic. It's something from a long time ago," I said softly, hoping that would be enough. But she shook her head, looking at me with eyes wide and uncomprehending. "But how? Why?" And that was when the memories came rushing back. I remembered the day I had put that container in the fridge, the fear I had felt as I pressed it onto the top shelf, hidden behind jars and bottles, hoping no one would ever notice. I remembered the reason I had done it, the desperation, the shame, the quiet hope that my past could stay in the shadows. Now, my daughter was holding it in her hands, seeing everything I had tried to hide. I could see the questions forming in her mind, the shock, the fear, the confusion. And I knew that whatever I said next had to be gentle, careful, honest, or I might lose her trust forever. I knelt down beside her, trying to meet her gaze. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts, This isn't something I wanted you to see. It's something from before you were born. I thought I had taken care of it. I thought it would stay hidden, and I paused, my throat tight. I never imagined you'd find it." Her hands shook as she clutched the container closer, and for a long moment, we just sat there in silence. The refrigerator hummed quietly, the only sound in the kitchen, and the weight of that small glass container seemed to fill the entire room. I could feel her fear, her disbelief, the way her world had shifted. In an instant, finally, she looked at me, her voice small and broken. "Mom, why would you hide this?" she asked, and I knew she needed the truth, the whole truth, even if it hurt both of us. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the confession I had postponed for years. "It's complicated," I began. It's about choices I made a long time ago, things I thought I could handle on my own. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, and I never wanted you to see this. But it stayed with me. I couldn't just throw it away, even though I wanted to forget it. I put it here because I thought it was the safest place. Her eyes filled with tears, and I could see the mixture of relief and fear on her face, the relief that I was finally telling her something, the fear that this part of my life was darker than she had imagined. I reached out, gently touching her shoulder. I should have told you sooner, I whispered. I should have been honest before you found it like this. She shook her head, unable to speak, and I realized that words alone weren't going to bridge the gap between us. The container was a symbol of a past she hadn't lived through, a past that now felt like it had crashed into her life without warning. I had to be patient, had to let her process it, had to let her understand that the person she knew, her mother, was the same person she had always loved. Despite the secrets I had kept, hours passed that night. We sat in the kitchen, side by side, the container between us, neither of us touching it again. She finally asked questions, small, hesitant ones, and I answered as carefully and honestly as I could, revealing the story behind the glass, the reasons I had hidden it, and the lessons I had learned. By the time she went to bed, I could see that she was shaken, but she wasn't broken. She had a new understanding of me, of my past, of the choices that had shaped the life we shared. And I too felt something shift inside me, a relief that the secret was no longer mine alone, a quiet hope that sharing it would not destroy our bond, but maybe somehow strengthen it. Even now, when I think back to that night, I remember the exact way she had fallen to her knees, the way her hands had trembled, the wide-eyed look of shock and fear. And I remember the weight of the glass container in my hands, a simple object that carried so much history, so much pain, so many truths. It was the beginning of a conversation we had both avoided for years, and it changed us both forever. I remember the morning after she found the container. The house felt heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. My daughter moved slowly, almost mechanically, going through the motions of getting ready for school. I watched her from the doorway, unsure whether to speak or to give her space. Her silence was louder than any words she could have said, and I knew that even though we had talked the night before, the weight of discovery still pressed down on her. Breakfast was quiet. I set out her plate, poured the cereal, and watched her pick at it without really eating. I tried to start a normal conversation, asking about her day, what she wanted for lunch, but she answered in short, clipped sentences. The difference was palpable. She had seen a side of me that no one else had, and it had changed how she looked at the world, at me, at herself. I thought about my own childhood, about the things I had hidden from my parents, the mistakes I had made, the shame I had carried silently, and I realized that what I had done to protect myself now echoed in my daughter's life. I had wanted to shield her from the past, but in doing so, I had created a secret that now loomed over us like a shadow. The day went on in a blur of small routines. I did the laundry, tidied up the living room, and went about cooking lunch, all while my mind circled back to that container. I couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen, the questions she hadn't asked, and the unspoken feelings she carried. I tried to imagine her walking through the day, replaying the image of what she had found, the shock and fear in her eyes. When she came home from school, she went straight to her room, closed the door, and didn't speak to me for a long time. I respected that. But it was difficult. I wanted to explain, to apologize, to make her understand that the past doesn't define who we are today, but I also knew I couldn't force that understanding. I had to let her come to it in her own time. That evening, she finally emerged from her room. She looked pale, her hair slightly messy, her eyes still wide with lingering disbelief. She sat at the kitchen table without saying a word, staring at the floor, and I realized that this was her way of processing, of grappling with what she had discovered. I didn't interrupt her. I simply sat across from her, giving her space, but letting her know I was there. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "Mom, why didn't you tell me before?" Her voice was soft but strained, carrying the weight of 1,000 honest questions. I reached across the table, taking her hand gently in mine, and tried to explain as calmly as I could. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought it was something from my past that you didn't need to know about, something that wouldn't affect your life. But I see now that hiding it only made it more powerful, more frightening when you found it unexpectedly." She nodded slowly, absorbing my words, but I could see the struggle in her eyes. She wanted to trust me, to believe that I had done the right thing, but the discovery had shaken something fundamental in her. It's just so much, she whispered. I don't know how to feel. I squeezed her hand, letting her know that it was okay not to have an answer right away. I know, sweetheart, I said. It's a lot, and it's going to take time. But I'm here. We can face it together, one step at a time. Over the next few days, our routine shifted. The fridge, once an ordinary appliance, now held a presence of tension and memory. Every time I opened it, I remembered her kneeling there, the fear and confusion in her eyes. I began to think about the ways in which our lives are shaped by what we choose to hide, and how those hidden things, no matter how carefully concealed, have a way of resurfacing when we least expect them. My daughter and I began to have small, careful conversations. She asked questions tentatively at first, about my past, about why I had made certain decisions, and about what had led me to hide the container in the first place. I answered honestly, without sugarcoating or evading, and I could see her slowly beginning to understand. The trust between us was fragile, but it was there, being rebuilt with each word, each gesture, each acknowledgement of the past. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, she finally shared her feelings openly. I felt betrayed, she said quietly, not because of what was in the container, but because you kept it from me. I felt like you didn't trust me enough to know. Her words hit me hard, but I didn't flinch. I nodded, letting her know that I understood. I see that now, I admitted, and I'm sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have let you in, even if it was hard. Her expression softened slightly, and she leaned against me, resting her head on my shoulder. I needed to know that I can trust you, Mom. That even when things are scary or confusing, you're still here. I held her close, feeling the weight of her words settle between us. In that moment, I realized that the container, as terrifying and shocking as it had been, had also opened a door. It forced us to confront our fears, our mistakes, and our hidden histories. And through that confrontation, we found a new level of honesty and connection. Over the following weeks, we continued to talk, to share stories from my past, to answer questions that had lingered unspoken for years. My daughter learned about the choices I had made, the regrets I carried, and the lessons I had learned. And I learned about her resilience, her empathy, and her capacity to forgive and understand. The discovery in the fridge had been a shock, yes, but it had also become a catalyst for growth for both of us. I could see her confidence returning, the way she moved through the house with a little more ease, the way she smiled again without hesitation. And I could feel my own heart lighten, knowing that while the past cannot be erased, it can be shared, confronted, and ultimately transformed into something that brings people closer rather than drives them apart. Even now, when I open the fridge, I see that small container and remember the night. It changed everything. But instead of fear or shame, I feel gratitude for the honesty it forced, for the conversations it sparked, and for the bond it strengthened between my daughter and me. It is a reminder that even the most shocking discoveries, the ones that make us fall to our knees, can lead to understanding, connection, and healing. The days after that initial shock became a strange mix of normalcy and tension. On the surface, we carried on with our routine: school, work, meals, homework, but underneath it all, there was an undercurrent of unease. My daughter had begun to observe me differently. Every time I moved in the kitchen, every time I opened a cupboard or the fridge, she would glance at me, her expression uncertain, almost cautious. It wasn't accusatory, but it was clear she was trying to reconcile the image of the mother she had always known with the revelations she had uncovered. One afternoon, she followed me into the pantry while I was preparing snacks. "Mom," she said quietly, "how many other things? Things like that, are there?" I froze mid-motion, holding a bag of chips in my hand. The question was loaded, more than just curiosity. It was a search for truth, a way to understand whether my past was as compartmentalized as I had hoped, or whether it was tangled into the very fabric of our home. I set the chips down, taking a deep breath. "There aren't any more hidden things," I said, though my voice carried a tremor I couldn't hide. "That container, it was the only thing I kept from you. I promise." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she tilted her head, her eyes searching mine, weighing the truth in my words. I could feel the tension in the room, a quiet but persistent pressure, as if the air itself had thickened with uncertainty. She finally nodded, though her body language betrayed lingering doubt. "I want to trust you, Mom," she said softly, "but it's hard." After seeing that, I reached out, placing my hand over hers. "I know, sweetheart, and I understand. Trust isn't automatic, it's something we build, especially after it's been shaken." In the following weeks, subtle changes began to emerge in our interactions. My daughter became more vigilant, more questioning. She would ask about my day in unusual detail, sometimes pausing mid-question as if calculating whether my answers aligned with the truth. I could feel her scanning for inconsistencies, for hidden motives. And though I answered honestly, the act of being watched so closely made me more self-conscious, more aware of every movement, every word. It wasn't just her scrutiny that created tension, it was the emotional weight she carried. One evening, I found her sitting on her bed with the container still in her hands, even though we had agreed to leave it locked away in the kitchen cabinet. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I can't stop thinking about it," she said. "I keep imagining all the things you might have done, all the secrets you could have." I sat beside her, careful not to take the container from her, realizing that it had become both a burden and a talisman for her, a tangible piece of the past that she needed to hold to process. "I understand," I whispered. "It's heavy, isn't it? To think about what you didn't know, what I tried to hide. But holding on to it like this, it won't help either. We have to face it together, not let it control us." Her hands shook slightly as she placed the container down beside her. "I'm scared, Mom," she admitted. "Scared that you'll lie again, or that there's more I don't know." The fear in her voice cut deeper than any reproach could have. I pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. "I promise," I said, "no more lies, no more secrets. We start from here, with honesty, and we face whatever comes next together." Despite our assurances, the tension persisted. At school, she became withdrawn, distracted, her teachers noticing a change in her demeanor. Friends asked questions, but she brushed them off, and at home, she oscillated between bursts of conversation and long stretches of silence. I could see the emotional pressure building, the way the shock of discovery was reshaping her sense of security and her understanding of our family. One evening, she confronted me again, this time with a sharper edge. "Mom, why didn't you just throw it away?" she demanded, pointing to the container. "If it was so bad, why keep it in the fridge where anyone could find it?" Her tone was not angry, it was tense, charged with confusion and hurt. I swallowed hard, knowing the answer wouldn't make her feel better. "I kept it because I wasn't ready to face it myself," I admitted. "It was my way of coping, of keeping a part of my past contained. I thought if it stayed out of sight, it would stay out of mind." I see now how wrong that was. Her eyes filled with tears again, and I could see the emotional storm raging inside her. She wanted to understand, to forgive, to move past it, but the layers of shock and betrayal were thick and heavy. She stood abruptly, pacing the room, her hands tangled in her hair. I don't even know who you are sometimes," she said, her voice breaking. "The mom I knew, the mom I trusted. How could she have kept something like this from me?" I felt my own heart ache as I watched her struggle. "I'm still that mom," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "I am still the person who loves you, who has always tried to protect you. But I am also human. I make mistakes. I make choices that aren't always perfect." This was one of those choices. For hours that night, we talked in fragments, punctuated by silence. She asked questions I hadn't anticipated, questions that required me to revisit moments I had long tried to forget. Each answer I gave seemed to open another door, another layer of complexity, another crack in the veneer of our daily lives. It was during those nights of fractured conversations that I began to notice subtle changes in myself as well. I became hyper-aware of the way I moved in the house, of what I said, of how I presented myself. The weight of her scrutiny, though rooted in love and fear, created a pressure I hadn't expected. I realized that the container, simple and unassuming as it was, had become a symbol not just of my past, but of the fragility of trust, of the vulnerability inherent in honesty, and of the delicate balance between shielding loved ones and including them in our truths. One evening, after a particularly tense conversation, she left the room abruptly, slamming her door in frustration. I sat alone in the kitchen, the refrigerator humming quietly, and felt a wave of despair. How had a single object caused such upheaval? How had my attempt to protect her from the past ended up creating a barrier between us? It became clear to me that the real challenge wasn't just about explaining the container, it was about navigating the emotional fallout it had triggered. My daughter's perception of me, of our family, of our safety and stability had been altered. And I understood that earning back her sense of security wouldn't be quick or easy. The following days were marked by careful observation, small gestures of reassurance, and tentative conversations. I tried to demonstrate that my love and intentions had always been genuine, even if my actions had been flawed. I encouraged her to express her feelings, no matter how difficult, and I listened without defensiveness, allowing her to process the complex emotions that had surfaced. Even with these efforts, the tension persisted. She would catch herself hesitating before speaking, as if measuring her words, testing the waters to see if she could trust me fully again. And I, in turn, found myself constantly reassessing my actions, my words, and my presence, knowing that every choice I made now carried the potential to either rebuild trust or deepen the divide. Then came the first subtle sign that our relationship was shifting, not back to how it had been, but towards something more resilient. One evening, she approached me in the kitchen, holding a notebook. "I've been writing," she said softly, about what I found, about how it made me feel. "I think it's helping me understand." I felt a rush of relief and pride. This was a breakthrough, however small, a step toward processing, toward healing. "I'd love to read it," I said gently, and she shook her head. "Not yet," she replied. "I just needed to tell you I'm trying. That's all for now." It was a fragile truce, but a truce nonetheless. For the first time since the discovery, I felt a glimmer of hope. I realized that rebuilding trust, restoring emotional security, and navigating the fallout of a shocking revelation wasn't a matter of words alone. It required patience, empathy, and consistent action over time. The container had triggered a storm, yes, but it had also opened a path, a narrow, winding path toward understanding, toward reconciliation, toward learning to live with the past without letting it dominate the present. And so we continued. Days passed with careful conversations, moments of tentative laughter, and silences that were no longer heavy with fear, but filled with reflection. The container remained in the kitchen, still a presence, still a reminder, but its power over us gradually diminished as honesty, patience, and love began to take root. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything shifted in a way I had never anticipated. The sun was low, casting long, warm streaks of light across the kitchen tiles. I was preparing tea, my mind preoccupied with everyday thoughts, when my daughter came rushing in, her face pale and taut with urgency. She didn't speak at first, she just held the container in both hands and stared at it as though it had grown heavier since the last time she touched it. "Mom, you need to see this," she finally said, her voice trembling. There was a note of panic in her tone that made my stomach tighten. I set the teapot down carefully and moved toward her. "What is it?" I asked, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. She handed me a piece of paper, slightly crumpled, that had somehow slipped under the lid of the container. I stared at it, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The handwriting wasn't mine, it was jagged, hurried, urgent. A wave of recognition hit me immediately, and I felt the air leave my lungs. The note was a message from someone I had hoped to never hear from again, someone connected to the container, someone whose presence I had spent years trying to erase from my memory. My daughter watched me, wide-eyed, sensing the gravity of what I had found. "Mom, who wrote this?" she asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and shook my head. "It's from the past," I said. "Someone I thought I had left behind. But it seems they never left me." The note detailed events, connections, and accusations I had long tried to bury. Names I had not mentioned to anyone, circumstances I had worked tirelessly to conceal, were all there in ink. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Everything I had believed to be settled, everything I had kept locked away, was suddenly alive, present, and threatening to undo the fragile stability of my life. My daughter's grip on my arm tightened. "Mom, what does this mean?" she asked, her voice cracking. I could feel her fear, the same fear I had felt years ago when I first faced these memories, and it made my own chest ache. "It means," I whispered, "that there are consequences I never expected, and that our past, our family, may not be as safe as we thought. The following days were a blur of tension, anxiety, and sleepless nights. The note had awakened something I had hoped was dead, a connection to people and choices I had tried to leave behind. Every ring of the phone, every unexpected knock at the door, made me flinch. And my daughter, who had been cautiously rebuilding trust in me, now watched every move I made with suspicion and worry. One evening, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, the container open in front of her again. She had gone through every item, every note, every scrap of paper, trying to piece together a narrative that I had hoped would remain hidden. Her eyes, wide and determined, met mine. "Mom, why didn't you tell me everything?" she demanded. "Why keep all of this from me?" I sat down slowly, taking in the sight of her, the same daughter I had known, yet changed, more aware, more cautious, more burdened by the weight of hidden truths. I said softly, my voice quivering. "I tried to protect you from all of this. I didn't want you to see the things I've done, the people I've hurt, the mistakes I made. I thought keeping it hidden would make it safe. I was wrong." Her tears spilled over then, and I realized that the shock she felt wasn't just about the container, or the note, or even the secrets themselves. It was the betrayal, the realization that the person she trusted most, the person she believed was her safe haven, had a past filled with shadows she had never known existed. Then, the first truly shocking revelation came: an email from the same person who had written the note. It was sent to my daughter by accident, a slip of fate, exposing truths I had spent decades concealing. She opened it, her hands trembling, and as she read aloud, I could see her collapse inwardly. The message contained allegations, half-truths, and manipulations designed to destabilize anyone who dared to hold on to the container. It wasn't just about my past anymore. It was about my present, my family, and my daughter's perception of me. The carefully constructed life I had maintained, the quiet routines that had once brought comfort, were now threatened by a reality I could neither ignore nor fully control. Over the next few days, we were both consumed by this discovery. My daughter oscillated between anger, disbelief, and sorrow. She questioned every story I had ever told her, every choice I had made, and every word I had spoken. "Mom, I don't even know what's real anymore," she said one night. Her voice, barely a whisper, shaking with exhaustion and fear. I tried to comfort her, to explain the context, to reassure her of my intentions. But each word felt insufficient. The revelations had shattered the foundation of trust between us. And I realized that the path forward was not about defense or explanation, it was about facing the storm together, unflinchingly, and finding a way to navigate the truth. Then came the confrontation. The person from my past arrived at our doorstep, unannounced, uninvited, and unapologetic. My daughter saw them first, and her reaction, fear, confusion, and disbelief, mirrored my own inner turmoil. I had kept this person at bay for years, and now they stood in our home. The container in her hands, a silent witness to all that had been hidden. Words were exchanged, accusations and defenses spilling into the air like storm clouds. My daughter clutched the container tightly, as if it were both shield and anchor, and I realized that the object I had tried to hide had become central to our confrontation, central to the unraveling of a past I had worked so hard to contain. The emotional explosion that followed was inevitable. My daughter screamed, cried, and demanded answers, demanding that I face not only the truths of my past, but also the consequences that had now reached into our present. I spoke honestly, revealing everything, acknowledging my mistakes, and taking responsibility for the choices that had led us to this moment. Through it all, I watched my daughter process her emotions, her trust fractured, but not completely destroyed. The betrayal, the revelation, the power shift, it all collided in a moment of intensity that neither of us could have predicted. And yet, through the tears, through the anger, through the fear, there was a flicker of something else: understanding, empathy, and a shared recognition that while the past could not be undone, the way we responded to it would define our future. As the night wore on, the confrontation subsided into an uneasy silence. The container remained on the table, a symbol of the past, of mistakes, and of the emotional upheaval that had consumed us. My daughter and I sat together, exhausted, holding on to the fragile threads of connection that remained. And in that moment, I understood that the true challenge wasn't the revelation itself, it was the journey that followed. The process of rebuilding, forgiving, and reclaiming the trust that had been tested to its limits. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came slowly, quietly, in ways that were harder to ignore because they settled into our daily life. After the confrontation, after the shouting and the tears and the visitor from my past leaving our home, something shifted in my daughter. She was no longer just reacting. She was watching, listening, thinking. For the first time, the power in our relationship had changed. I felt it in the way she spoke to me, calm but firm. I felt it in the way she no longer accepted vague answers or emotional excuses. She was no longer the frightened child who had fallen to her knees in front of the fridge. She had stepped into a space of awareness, and that awareness gave her strength. One morning, she stood in the kitchen while I was making tea and said, "Mom, we need to talk about what happens next." Her voice was steady, not angry, not shaky, just clear. I turned to look at her, and for a moment, I saw her not as my little girl, but as someone standing on equal ground with me. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked. She took a deep breath. "I need to know that this won't happen again. Not just with that container, with anything. I can't live in a house where I don't know what's real." Her words were not cruel. They were honest, and they landed heavily in my chest because I knew she was right. For years, I had controlled the narrative. I decided what stayed hidden and what was shared. I told myself I was protecting her, but now, that power had shifted. She was asking for something deeper than comfort. She was asking for accountability. "I understand," I said quietly, "and you deserve that." But understanding was not enough. She needed proof. Over the next few days, she began asking direct questions, not emotional ones, practical ones. "Who else knows about this? Is there anything connected to our finances? Could someone else come back like that person did?" Each question forced me to confront consequences I had avoided for years. I contacted a lawyer to understand if there were any legal risks left from my past. I gathered old documents, letters, records I had shoved into boxes and forgotten. And I did not hide any of it from her. We sat together at the dining table as I laid everything out. Papers spread across the surface. Dates, names, decisions. I explained each one slowly, carefully, without softening the truth. My daughter listened in silence, sometimes taking notes, sometimes closing her eyes as if absorbing something painful but necessary. At one point, she looked up and said, "This is the first time I feel like you're really trusting me." That sentence stayed with me because it made me realize something painful and important. Trust is not proven by love alone. It is proven by transparency, especially when transparency is uncomfortable. The emotional justice did not come from punishment or revenge. It came from balance being restored, from me no longer holding all the control, from her no longer being kept in the dark. There were moments when this reversal of power hurt my pride. I won't lie about that. When she questioned my decisions, when she challenged my reasoning, when she said, "That doesn't make sense, Mom," I felt exposed, vulnerable, but I also felt something else underneath the discomfort. Relief, because I no longer had to carry the weight alone. One evening, we were cleaning the kitchen together. The fridge door was open, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The memory of that first night hung between us. Then my daughter reached inside, took out the container, and placed it on the counter. "I think it's time we decide what to do with this," she said. I nodded. "What do you think we should do?" She studied it for a long time. "I don't think destroying it is the answer," she said slowly. "But I don't think it should live in our fridge either. It doesn't deserve that space in our daily life." Her words were wise beyond her years. Together, we decided to store it in a sealed box, labeled clearly, and placed somewhere neutral. Not hidden, not displayed, just acknowledged. That act was powerful. It was not about the object itself. It was about reclaiming control over its meaning. The real payoff came weeks later, in a moment I did not expect. My daughter had a school presentation about family history. Normally, she would have avoided anything personal. This time, she came home and said, "I want to talk about how families carry stories. Not all good, not all bad, just real." I was nervous. "You don't have to include anything you're not comfortable with," I told her. She smiled gently. "I know, but I want to." She didn't share details. She didn't expose me. She spoke about learning that parents are human, that love can exist alongside mistakes, That truth can be painful, but secrecy is worse. When she finished her presentation, her teacher told her it was one of the most thoughtful talks she had heard. My daughter came home that day standing a little taller. That was the moment I understood emotional justice. Not shame, not blame, growth, strength, balance. Our relationship was no longer built on illusion. It was built on honesty, and that honesty, though hard-earned, gave us something stronger than the comfort I once tried to protect her with. It gave us mutual respect. The quiet did not come all at once. It arrived slowly in pieces, the way healing usually does. After everything we had faced, after the shock, the fear, the confrontation, and the long nights of talking, our house began to breathe again. Not the old way. Not the way it had before. The fridge door opened and changed everything. This was a different kind of quiet, deeper, more honest. Mornings became gentle. We no longer rushed past each other with half-spoken words. We sat together at the table, sometimes talking, sometimes not, but always aware of each other. The silence between us was no longer full of suspicion. It was full of understanding. I watched my daughter carefully during those weeks. She moved with more confidence now, but also with more awareness. She thought before she spoke. She observed people closely. She asked better questions. The innocence she had lost did not leave her empty. It left her grounded. One evening, as we folded laundry together, she said something that stayed with me. "I used to think parents were strong because they never broke," she said quietly. "Now I think they're strong because they survive breaking." I stopped folding and looked at her. She didn't look sad when she said it. She looked calm, certain, and I realized then that she had reached a place I had only reached much later in life. A place where reality is no longer terrifying, just real. For me, the change was just as deep, but quieter. I no longer woke up with the weight of secrets pressing on my chest. I no longer rehearsed half-truths in my head. I no longer feared being discovered, because there was nothing left to hide. The container no longer haunted me. It existed, yes, but it no longer ruled our emotions. It was part of our story, not the center of it. There were moments when guilt still surfaced. Late at night, when the house was asleep, I would think about the years I spent believing silence was protection. I would think about the version of my daughter who trusted without question, and I would mourn that loss. But I also reminded myself of something important. Growth often comes with grief, and love that survives. Truth is stronger than love built on illusion. One night, my daughter came into my room and sat on the edge of the bed. She hadn't done that in a long time. "Mom," she said, "do you ever wish I hadn't found it?" I thought carefully before answering. "Yes," I said honestly. "I wish you hadn't been hurt by it, but I don't wish we stayed the same. I don't think we were as safe as I believed." She nodded slowly. "I don't wish it either," she said. "It hurt, but I don't feel small anymore." That was when I understood the final lesson of everything we had been through. Protection is not about control. It is about preparation. And preparation comes from truth. Over time, our home became a place where questions were welcome, where emotions were not dismissed, where difficult conversations were not postponed. We learned how to pause instead of react, how to listen instead of defend, how to sit with discomfort without trying to escape it. I noticed changes in myself too. I became more patient with others, less quick to judge, more willing to admit when I didn't have answers. The past had humbled me, but it had also freed me. The fridge became just a fridge again. The kitchen returned to being a place of meals and laughter, not fear. And sometimes when I watched my daughter open the fridge without hesitation, without flinching, I felt a quiet sense of victory. Not because we had erased the pain, but because we had integrated it. One afternoon, months later, my daughter hugged me unexpectedly. Tight, long. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she said into my shoulder. I held her and whispered, "Thank you for staying." That was dignity, not perfection, not redemption in a dramatic way. Just two people choosing honesty again and again. Life did not become easier in every way, but it became clearer. And clarity has a strength of its own. Sometimes, healing does not look like happiness. It looks like steadiness, like calm mornings, like trust rebuilt quietly, like love that no longer fears the light. What my daughter found in my fridge did make her fall to her knees, but what she found afterward made her stand back up, stronger, wiser, and unafraid to see people as they truly are. And as her mother, walking beside her instead of ahead of her, I finally learned that the greatest gift I could give her was not a perfect past but an honest present.